Earlier, I spoke to Rob Harris, the global sports correspondent for the Associated Press, who's been covering the sporting impact of coronavirus since the very beginning. He says events are moving incredibly fast.
It really has escalated in just around 3 weeks. There was that Saturday night announcement when suddenly Serie A announced games the next day would be behind closed doors. And there weren't that many cases at the time. Then some of those restrictions seemed to be eased, even wider society restrictions like gatherings in pubs, etc. And there was messages from the Players' Union. They were calling for games to be called off completely rather than playing behind closed doors. And it took the intervention really of the Olympic body then to say, actually, we just need all sport to be off entirely. And that obviously preceded then the announcement from the Prime Minister last night of the effective complete lockdown of the country, which actually shows extreme measures are needed when you believe there's anything you can do to contain the spread of the virus.
More than one meeting planned this week amongst Italian football bosses. Can Serie A actually be finished this season? Because the longer you delay it, the bigger the build-up of matches that need to be played.
I mean, ultimately, it's about the safety of the nation, the health of people, and sport can take a back seat in that case. There is time to complete the season. The problem is we just don't know when the virus will be contained enough to be able to resume normal activity there. The ban on activities is initially until the start of April. That's obviously just a point in time that they've set for now. Obviously, we've seen how seriously the Italian government are taking it and how concerned they are. The fact that they've even had to impose these unprecedented peacetime operations. Obviously, Euro 2020 starts in 3 months in Rome. You've got other fixtures there as well, which can't take place. You've got the Italian players due here in London for a friendly against England in just a couple of weeks. It's very difficult to see how that will go ahead as well.
How concerned are UEFA, the European governing body? You mentioned Euro 2020. We got Champions League round of 16 second leg games resuming this week as well. The biggest problem, I guess, immediately is next week's Juventus game at home. Can't go ahead at the moment.
Yeah, and you get a backlog of fixtures then, which makes it very difficult and has a knock-on effect for future rounds of the competition.
You can't play the quarterfinals of the Champions League if the round of 16 hasn't got finished.
Yeah, and obviously, UEFA are having to listen to as many of the health authorities in the various countries. It's really out of their hands because
Could they throw Juventus out of the competition?
Well, I mean, that would be very unfair, I think, in this scenario. I mean, you know, they'd have to find ways of potentially being able to play the fixture. Obviously, if Italians were to come to certain countries like England at the moment, they're being told to self-isolate for 2 weeks, which is, you know, really significant measures that are required.
This year's biggest sporting event are the Olympic Games in Tokyo, starting in July. Only last week, the IOC president, Thomas Bach, said the executive board meeting refused to discuss contingencies at all. Doesn't he look rather foolish now?
I mean, it's implausible to think the IOC aren't actually discussing a potential postponement or cancellation in other meetings. It might not have taken place in that executive board meeting, but for a business that, a company, an operation that is so reliant on this one big event, the Olympics, to not have discussed plans, you know, does seem, you know, as I say, implausible because it's worth billions to them. But as it stands now, the Olympics, what, 4 months or so away? Tens of thousands of athletes, support staff, spectators all gathering in one place. It's very hard at the moment to see how that can go ahead as normal, packed stadiums.
At what point does sport give up trying to put on games when you're seeing a rising loss of human life?
I think that's certainly the message that's been sent out from Italy. Actually, above all else, public health matters. The safety of the nation, the health of people matters. But there is another thing around the coronavirus that, you know, for all the concern and alarm, for a lot of people, the majority of people, the symptoms are mild. It's amongst the elderly that there is greater concern about, the risk to life. But many tens of thousands of people in China have recovered already from COVID-19. So that offers some hope. We've seen reported figures in China are down. So they'll be looking towards that in terms of the Olympics themselves. But the Olympics is an international event. So many people in parts of the world where the virus might only be spreading to now could potentially be gathering in Tokyo. But, I mean, it's really difficult to cancel an Olympics when, you know, the authorities in Japan have spent north of 10 billion, much more in preparation for it. And to find a place in the calendar to then move the games to is going to be very difficult.
Rob Harris speaking to me a little bit earlier. And in the last couple of hours, Spain has announced that La Liga, its top football division, will hold its next 2 rounds of matches behind closed doors, starting with Eibar at home to Real Sociedad later on Tuesday. We're also getting reports that in Germany, some Bundesliga games will also be held without any spectators present. And that's going to include, we think, the Champions League match between Bayern and Chelsea